We often measure religious identity through visible markers, membership rolls, attendance, and formal affiliation. Yet these outward structural markers can persist long after the internal orientation that gave them weight has vanished. In his paper, Thresholds of Just Being, Iman Motlaq Arani argues that belonging to a religious tradition is a fragile continuum. It depends not on a binary status of believer or unbeliever, but on the self's active participation in a shared civilizational horizon. Arani focuses on the deficient mode of presence. This describes individuals who do not reject their faith, but instead remain within its symbolic perimeter, while no longer inhabiting its ethical or transformative goals. To analyze this state, we look to the Heideggerian concept of nur noch, a German phrase meaning only still or nothing more than. The nur noch believer is just still a believer. They are structurally present in the community, but they lack the dynamic engagement and care that turn a religious label into an existential reality. Tracking institutional membership fails to capture this hollowing out of faith. From the outside, the presence looks identical to active belief, even as the internal vitality has ceased to function. Physical objects have a legible identity tied to structure. A chair is defined by its readiness to serve a specific function. If you remove the back, its functional identity shifts. It's immediately reclassified as a stool. The transition is clear, external, and immediate. Human beings operate under a different ontological structure. In philosophy, the human self, or Dasein, is defined by its relation to others and its projection toward future possibilities. Our being is not a fixed property, but a way of moving toward the world. When a person stops moving toward those possibilities, they do not visibly transform into another category. They retain their name and social standing even as their internal alignment with their world collapses. This creates what Arani calls an unnecessary necessity. We have the capacity to maintain an identity label as a hollow presence, persisting in a deficient mode long after the structures of care and orientation have dissolved. There are two distinct ways a person's relationship to a tradition can end. Confusing them makes it impossible to address the erosion of a community's vitality. Spiritual death is a binary exit. The self no longer comports itself toward the tradition and leaves its referential world entirely. The door is closed. Spiritual demise is a spectral condition. The individual remains factically affiliated. They stay within the ritual and social space, but they no longer project themselves toward the faith's goals. In demise, faith becomes a corpse. The external structure remains visible, but the animating horizon of life has withdrawn. The person carries their belief as a cultural backdrop, rather than a source of obligation. This manifests as reciting prayers or attending meetings by rote. The actions no longer disclose a world. They simply form a residual habit that maintains the appearance of belonging. Spiritual demise is a suspended negation. It allows a person to linger inside the house of faith without actually dwelling in the purpose that built it. We can plot these states onto the framework of the Baha'i faith, where belonging is defined by participation in a divine project of global unity. This matrix maps the spectrum of belonging. The horizontal axis represents structural affiliation. The vertical axis represents existential orientation. At the top right is maximal presence, a state of constant movement toward a goal that exceeds the self. This requires the inseparable link between recognition and obedience. But at the bottom right is deficient suspension. The structural label remains, but the node loses its directional vectors. Faith has collapsed into symbolic inertia. In this minimal state, revelation is no longer a world-disclosing force. It becomes an inherited symbol or a cultural memory, retained at the level of affiliation, but absent from the level of action. This map shows that Baha'i identity functions as a continuous act of becoming. It is an orientation that must be reenacted daily through love, praxis, and communal presence. When an entire community becomes saturated with nur noch believers, the crisis shifts from the individual to the institution. A gap opens between the name the community claims and the world it actually forms. When members affirm doctrine in name but not in direction, the movement loses its capacity to generate social transformation. This signals a historical weakening of the link between naming and becoming. As Abdu'l-Baha warned, the worst enemies of the cause are in the cause, those who persistently violate every fundamental law of love and unity. A community that normalizes this passive state suffers from structural suffocation. Its administrative systems may remain intact, but its ability to orient its members toward a shared civilizational horizon disappears. This inertia acts as a silent limit on a religion's potential. It remains invisible to those who track only head counts or voting rights, yet it hollows out the movement from within. Because the symbolic frame of the Nur-Nur self remains intact, the condition is not terminal. The corpse of faith is dormant rather than destroyed. Renewal requires a deliberate re-entry into praxis. This shifts the self from just being, static presence, into being with, the act of communal service and responsibility to others. You cannot heal this rupture through institutional surveillance or enforcement. Restoration only occurs when the individual reawakens their own horizon of becoming and reconnects their name to their actions. Theological language must prioritize this actualization over mere descriptive. It must function as a call to move, emphasizing that recognition is only valid when it issues in the transformation of the self and the world. Belonging is a projective act of striving. Faith is the movement that occurs between what we name ourselves and what we actually enact. Only in that motion does belief recover its depth.